everyone, and welcome to Tinfoil Tales, and I'm your host, Brandon Wright. Got a great episode here for you tonight, but before we dive into that, if you've got a story to share, please contact me at tinfoiltalespodcast@gmail.com. You can get a hold of me on Facebook, just look up Tinfoil Tales Podcast, and if you enjoy the show and would like to help it grow, please share it around. You can leave us a 5-star review. That helps the ranking of the podcast for potential people to find it. And anything that you can help think of that would help grow the podcast audience would definitely be appreciated. We're going to go back dive into our topic for today. We're joined by our guest, Tim. Well, Tim's a tattoo artist out in New Jersey area, but he's had a lot of experiences over the years, and he's also had some pretty interesting customers that have come in and shared some stories as well, so we're going to dive on into our story with Tim. So sit back, relax, and enjoy the show. I'd like to take the time and welcome my guest, Tim, today. Tim, thanks for coming out and talking with me.
Oh, it's nice to be on here.
So, I can see you're a tattoo artist.
Yeah. I've been doing that for quite some time. I don't know if I'm going to lose credibility from that. No, I'm kidding. Actually, it comes to benefit with my job because people are in severe pain for me to tell them like a lot of stories. And I lived in LA originally, where it was very crime ridden and all that. So there's tons of stories about that. But a couple of my favorite ones are the ones I'm about to tell right now.
Yeah.
Oh, yeah. I mean, the problem with my stories, though, is you have to take my word for it, That and they just, when you go online and you see interviews with people about this stuff, they have so much more information than I'm able to give. Even when it's ghost stories, they'll be like, oh, there's an old lady from the 1800s named Betsy that wears a red dress at, 12 o'clock at night and walks around the perimeter of the house or something. And they have all this elaborate, she just wants to find her killer or whatever, I don't have any of that, unfortunately. And I found you on that abduction group, as you know.
Yeah.
And see, now what happened was, after the congressional hearing, and I deep dove. Now, I was never abducted, and I really don't think I was. But after all this information publicly came out about this subject, I just realized I do have unresolved issues about it, because when I saw what I saw, it shattered everything that the church and my parents and society was trying to tell me about science and life as we know it. You know what I mean? Higher order of power, whatever, So that was very transforming moment, Not that I think that I started to springboard forth into better directions of thought at that point in time. I had to kind of digest it for a long time, and I still do. But I guess I could begin the story now if you want me to.
Yeah, that's fine. You can go ahead.
So I was in Reseda, California, and I'm assuming it was 1997. You see, now, some of the stuff about time and all that, I didn't have any loss of time. See, it's not even that cool of a story. I know some people are like, I was missing for a week or 5 hours or 3 hours, whatever, and it's not like stories like Benny and Barney Hill or Travis Bolton, and that stuff's amazing, and I do think even if I didn't experience what I did, I would still be reading about that stuff, There are some people I believe to be believable, and then some others I'm just like, I don't know about all that, And there's just some stuff I hear that I just hope to God's not true. But anyways, yesterday I did jot down some information to try to depict the story better, so you get a better visualization mentally of it. So I was in Reseda, California. I'm assuming it was 1997. I was young. So anyways, yeah. So I was in a townhome, so there's a lot of residents there, and there's 2 stories of the townhome, etc., whatever. My parents were making dinner. It was around this time of the year, so it gets dark earlier. Like it was 8:30 or 9 or something like that. And I just stood in the little backyard. There was a wood fenced backyard. I'm assuming that was like 40 by 35 or something like that. I even went as crazy as to like search the townhomes to see if they had dimensions of their backyard so I could kind of figure this out more. But I guess it's not that important. And maybe another time, But And also, I tried to search for events similar or corresponding to this during that time period, because there are a lot of charts that say, when sightings occur or have occurred. I mean, and maps and all that. And, there was stuff in Los Angeles and other places around it, and what years, how many sightings, blah, blah, blah. This didn't correspond with that. I was hoping. So I was standing out in the backyard just by myself, staring at the sky. And in the valley, the sound bounces around real weird. So sometimes you'll see the San Fernando Valley, a light in the sky, and you won't hear it for a couple minutes until it passes a certain point in which you hear the engine of the airplane or helicopter or whatever. But sometimes something will be in the sky lit up that is just silent for a couple minutes. So this particular evening, and I guess I was in 7th grade or something like that. It's our 6th grade, or the beginning of 7th grade. It was before I was really smoking weed and stuff like that and drinking, So I wasn't there yet. That's a whole bunch of different stories. But I'm standing there by myself, just having a moment to myself, staring at the sky. And I see this white light in the sky. I assumed it was an airplane, but I didn't see the red blinking light. And I was waiting for it to change direction and hear the engine and all that stuff. But it wasn't really that high up in the sky at all. And I guess it caught notice of me because it flew into my backyard. Like it was acknowledging that I was staring at it, And I did write some notes down about it, and I found an object in the household that was a similar size. Now, I did do some research about LED bulbs. They had been invented at that point in time, but I don't remember seeing on the shelves of supermarkets. But it did resemble an LED bulb where it had like a glowing plasticky kind of look. It was about 2 1/4 inches tall, in round. It was just a perfect ball, And it had a really insignificant light coming out of it. It wasn't really that bright, but it illuminated all the way around. I didn't see any fancy machinery or any of that stuff. And later on, I did hear stories where these light up balls follow a larger craft, which I did not see, and that they're like scouts or some. I don't know. It just depends on what you decide to believe in and who's telling the story. But I did hear a story recently where there was multiple light balls, as I just described, surrounding a craft. But unfortunately, they were saying baseball sized. But one thing I did realize is when I spoke to you earlier, I gave you the wrong size of the height of these balls. And what I had to do was take a tape measure and kind of pull it out. Okay, it was about this far away. So my perception was off. It was a pinch bigger than I thought, because if it was back there, it appears smaller. You know what I mean? And so, and it was at my eye level. And it was, so it was about 1 foot 8 inches away from the fence. And I was about 12 feet away from it or closer. And it was at my eye level. I'm 5'3", so it's probably 5 or 5'3". I don't know. I think it was deliberately meeting up to my eye level. And it panned back and forth about 10 times. I'll try. We'll see if I can muscle memory it to see if it was 10. Yeah. I mean, it had a slight swoop when it was going left and right, like someone was holding a ball and moving it left and right. You know what I mean? It had a dip, back and forth. No pauses. Once it got there, it went back. And I don't know. Yeah, it didn't take very long. Anyway, so then it just stopped dead. And that's when I got really, scared. There was a side of me that was just amazed about it at first, where I was just like, oh, my God, I can't believe this is happening. And I didn't want to disrupt it. It's like seeing a deer in the woods where you're like, oh, no, if I make any sudden moves, it's going to bolt away. But after it panned back and forth, which was already weird enough, and I just stopped dead, and I assumed staring at me, I was like, what the fuck, I didn't say anything. I didn't even move. I just flat-jawed, stood there, and I probably didn't look as surprised as I felt. And then it just disappeared into the sky, never to be seen again. And when I went back into the townhome, my parents knew something was up. They were like, oh, my God, what's the matter with you? You look like you saw a ghost. I was like, no, nothing, I'm fine. And I went in my room, and I was just like, what the fuck, And that point in my life, I'd hear stories, and there was movies about this stuff, like mental illness. And I'm like, I really hope that's not the beginning of schizophrenia or something like that. So I very much kept it to myself, except for a very small group of friends. And then, like I said, recently I've just been trying to figure it out because I'm kind of unresolved about it. And every time I heard UFO stories where people had like a telepathic message or a loss in time and being on a table with abduction, I kind of get upset because it's like, what the hell was that about? What was the point of that? I don't know. It's always going to plague my mind until probably the day I die. But, it does increase the mystery of life. And that's something I do appreciate about life. I think if, an all-knowing being just parted the clouds and like, all right, this is the way life works, A, B, C, D, all the way to Z, I think I'd be pretty upset. You know what I mean? I like the potential complexity, and it doesn't have to feed into my ego. It doesn't have to be about me. I know human beings are very conscious beings and sentimental. And it's, and of course I get butthurt about it. Like I said, I will be like, oh man, I didn't get any message. I didn't get any superpowers. Thankfully I was not probed and prodded, but yeah, it's not like a Benny and Barney Hill story or anything like that. And that's it for that one.
Did you ever see anything like that again?
Yeah, absolutely. Yeah. So I'm again this is before everything popped open, so this was about 8 years ago or so. I was married for 10 years, and I was me and my ex-wife were at a brewery in Downingtown, Pennsylvania, and we got into an argument. So I figured when I got back in town, it was a very silent drive home. I would just, keep a distance, and I figured I'd go to my parents' house, which I did. They weren't home. I know that in like the consumption of alcohol probably discredits this, but I wasn't that intoxicated. I kept in mind I had to drive and all that stuff. So I went to their house, my parents' house, and they had like one of those like poolside chairs where you could arch back and just look at the sky, And I was sitting there, and all of a sudden my eyes focused, and I realized it was a clear as hell day. There was not a cloud to be seen. And you could just see the light blue of the sky. And I saw a squadron of silver balls that had to, and I thought about it at that moment too. I'm like, this is so high up. And it was blurry because it was so high up that these have to be pretty freaking big. I can't estimate what, I don't know. You know what I mean? I don't know how high up that was. But they were flying in a circular pattern. There was just a whole squad of them. I don't remember seeing them disappearing and reappearing. I just remember them being pretty consistent, and just interweaving in a circular pattern, very coordinated and interesting. And at that time, the cell phones, and I'm always one notorious, except for actually this year I have an iPhone 14, but I've been notorious my whole life for having like the least techie cell phone there is, whatever is cheapest and not upgraded and all that. And I just couldn't capture this on video, and it really upset me, which again is just so that's something that's going to irk me for the rest of my life. It just, I think it was the pixelation and how high it was, the resolution of the filming capabilities. It just was not cutting it. And I immediately, out of anger, deleted what I really wish I kept that footage, because now there's so many programs accessible to tweak footage and see, adjust the contrast and everything. And what are you going to do? But after having that second experience, and it's been a long time since then, I realized that, it might not be the last one. And thank God. And I think that's actually why I got like the newest, coolest phone, besides to take pictures of the work that I do every day. Is like, well, maybe this will come in handy one day. Now I have more of an advantage. At least I don't have to ask the question to myself, am I crazy? You know what I mean? This is, I don't know. I've seen some pretty nutty things in life, and thank God there were witnesses there, because otherwise, definitely people wouldn't believe half that stuff. You know what I mean? But
I think a lot of people, they don't even think about grabbing their phone right off the bat. Like if they see some shit or whatever, they're just kind of in awe of the moment, and they don't even think about trying to record it or get a photo of it. Not so much just UFOs, but just in general, like anything that they encounter with that awe factor.
Oh, sure. And for me, it's more believable when I see the person's hand shaking and them breathing all weird, because I think that if I did grab my phone, I'd be like, fuck, like, oh my God, I'm sorry, I cursed. edit, I guess. But I think I'd react the same way. I don't think my hand would be steady at all. And I have one more story actually, if you want to hear it.
Yeah, I'm here all day, so whatever you got to talk about.
Alrighty, so me and my friend Matt, and this is when I was in the height of smoking weed and drinking and all that stuff like that. But I think there's a different moral to this story here. So we were getting incredibly stoned, and we went into his backyard in his mom's house and laid down on the beach chairs, and we were in probably like 10th grade or something like that. And all of a sudden, out of nowhere, and we didn't even acknowledge it to each other. We were sure we were doubting ourselves, and then whatever, it was just incredible to see. We saw this giant, very stereotypical, huge UFO cutting through the clouds. And for a while, we just dumbfoundedly stared at it. And eventually I was like, yo, you see that? He was like, yeah, man, I do, I'm like, no effing way, And then after we saw that, we were just, we saw the paneling on it. We saw the lights on there, like what would be lights, I guess. It wasn't lit up. And we were just floored. And every time we went to a social event, we were like, oh my God, we saw this big UFO. It was so in the day, it was a bit cloudy, but it was so crispy and whoa, and being that I already saw something that pertains to that subject, I just didn't doubt it. But I don't know how much time passed. It must have been quite some time, because I did tell the story for a while. But eventually, I figured out what it was. It was I was driving. Well, no, my parents were driving. I was in the back seat. We were going to a restaurant or church. I don't know. Yeah, church. And they were about to get on the freeway. And over there, it's very notorious where people sell stuff next to the freeway. The fence where you're about to get on board on. And I saw exactly that UFO. It was a giant. What's the footage? I don't know. I'm talking about surpassing, it was probably 12 feet or so wide. It was a giant metallic balloon that rose from heat. You know what I mean? You inflate it and you sit it on the ground on a hot day and it starts to rise. And the way it behaved in the clouds was just coincidental. But it was the same paneling and same lights. And and I told my friend Matt, and he was just like, okay, I thought that was too good to be true. And I'm like, yeah, I guess, because, but it showed me that you can't always believe what you see. You know what I mean? It could be an explanation. But that ball I saw, the first story I told you, there was no technology like that then. I'm very thankful that it happened then and not now, because now I would doubt it and be like, oh, well, maybe the government made that. But by now, and I've been keeping track of like the stuff that's going into the skies that the government's making. I don't mean like I have like undisclosed information. It's just you see it, on airfields and things like this, or flying, what they brag about eventually. And it's been so many eras of that tech that's changed drastically, sure, but none of it even resembles that little ball that I saw in, I guess, 97, and that's really it. It's just all fascinating. I'm so glad that this is all cracked open, and hopefully next year we'll have some more answers,
Nowadays, people would think that the little ball thing was probably just like a little drone or something, but back in 97, those weren't readily available to people. So,
oh yeah, there was no, it was just a ball. There was no propulsion system. There was no fan blades, none of that. It was just a ball, like a cue ball, but smaller, and like a plasticky looking finish, because it was such a soft LED type glow. I did see a little bit of the light reflect off the fence behind it. It was I wrote it down. It was about a foot and 8 inches or so away from the fence. So it did have it did bounce off the wood, it did illuminate the area just a pinch, but it wasn't significant. I don't know what the point of that would be, I might get, and you know, when you hear the stories now about things like that following a larger UFO, maybe that's just so they see it's there, kind of like a lighthouse or a tower light, you know, like, oh, that's right there. We can't fly into it. I don't know, but I would assume the tech is so much more involved in that. That, and you read this stuff now, and they're saying that the aliens are actually interdimensional beings, and if they exist past, you know, what the fourth dimension is time, right? And you go beyond that. I mean, are we even seeing the whole thing, or are you just seeing a part of it? I don't know. But one story that really struck me, and it did involve these balls, was that Zimbabwe school aerial. The kids in 1994, the group, and they were all tiny kids. They were all like 8 and younger or so. I don't know. They looked like 10 and younger. Like they were elementary school. And that is interesting to see that 62 children saw that event, and actually one adult too. They were having a board meeting, so that all the teachers and staff were in that room. There was 3 different children that went in there to kind of get their attention, be like, hey, you need to come out here, something weird's happening, you know. And they didn't, but one of the staff that was running a snack booth or something like that finally got out, and all they saw was the craft taking off, you know. But the kids did note that there were like these smaller light balls around the craft, and I thought that was pretty cool.
Strangely enough, these little glowing orbs have been seen a lot lately when people have also seen like Bigfoot, Sasquatch type sightings, they think encounters with. They see these glowing little balls floating around out in the woods. So I think it's kind of strange that with UFOs, somehow are now people are considering that part of a whole Sasquatch type thing. Like, I'm wondering if it's not all somehow connected, because you even mentioned interdimensional beings. And a lot of people, for whatever reason these days, are thinking that that's what a Sasquatch actually is. So it is.
Oh yeah, you know, I don't mean to sound old tinfoil hat or whatever, but I've been also learning about since then nuclear energy and atoms and all that stuff, and how they even came up with the theories about dimensions. You know, even beyond string theory, which is the most heard one. But so that's why I said that, you know, maybe sometimes you're not even seeing the full being or thing that's presented to you for another dimension, because you just don't have the capability. We're only 3-dimensional people, you know, with 3-dimensional perspective. That's all we got. And there's so much more. There's potentially over 100 different dimensions. Like, what the hell? That's so inconceivable, you know, it's insane. But I think it's plausible, you know, and I'm starting to lean more that direction. I mean, obviously I do think that beings in other galaxies, universes, whatever, I mean, galaxies, solar systems, could exist. You know, we're all, and it's what's real fascinating to me is that whatever lands on this Earth is usually just what's on the, or if not all the time, just the stuff that's the periodic table of elements, which are atoms themselves. You know. And we have that new fusion reactor coming up now that they say is going to come in effect in the next 4 years. It's going to change the output of electricity. I don't know the math, but it's just so significant, more than like the giant nuclear reactors we have. And it's a very low danger system they created, where it doesn't output a lot of dangerous radiation, if not at all, you know. And it looks like it's going to be something that could just be strapped to a building someday. It's pretty small, you know. And I'm sure, and that's just the prototype. They're going to make smaller ones, but and it's going to be running off of seawater. And so I got real, you know, tinfoil hat and thought, wait a minute, maybe there really isn't UFO bases. Maybe they dunk in the water to refuel themselves for their own type of clean nuclear energy, you know, their own fusion system. I mean, sorry.
Yeah, there are a lot of theories about underwater alien bases. So. And a lot of things do run, like you said, a lot of the seawater and everything. They think that's part of the way of them recharging. That's why they dive into the water, because universally, a water is one of those building blocks that they think is needed for like evolution, for life to be out there. So it makes sense that maybe if there are species that are from a different galaxy or whatever that's traveled here, they'd want to come here because of the water.
So, oh, sure. Absolutely. I mean, well, you know, as we all know, the sun's a giant H-bomb in itself. And that's the most, I would assume, the most significant thing in our solar system, you know. it being the center of and the energy that's in it. But I say assume because who knows? The more we learn about life, it just gets more complex, which is great. I like it. That's what keeps me from getting all crazy and upset about all this stuff is that when you look back in history, especially during wars, there's always been accounts of UFOs and things like that.
That's where the
being
whole term Foo Fighters came from. Everyone thinks it's a band, but it was actually from what they were seeing back in World War II.
Oh yeah, and even I was reading recently, and I wish I wrote it down. There was a Roman general that would see these, what he called flaming shields, follow them when they would go into battle, and I believe that was before Christ. I can't remember. I should have wrote it down for this. I didn't know we were going to get this far. That you're just going to be like, "Oh, that's your story. Okay, peace."
No, I like having good discussions.
Oh man. And I love, and I do that with my customers too. Some of these kids are the stuff that they're telling me and helping me see more and learn more. And like I said, now I'm trying to figure out fusion energy and how that works and why that would pertain to it. And I love hearing about how UFOs have shut down missile silos, and you see the maps that what's the name of that guy that works for Tom DeLonge? He put up or I don't know if he made the map, but there's a map showing military bases and UFO sightings, and it's in sync big time. It's obvious that they're monitoring and they say that when you use a nuclear weapon, obviously you're destroying atoms and making this huge volatile effect, but how many dimensions does the strings of an atom vibrate in? 11 dimensions or something like that? Or it's proposed to be, right? And so they're saying that when you discharge a nuclear weapon, it disrupts things in other dimensions. And that's why these interdimensional beings are like, yo, man, that's enough of that, And if we wanted to, we could just shut this all down, And if that's the case, and I'm hoping it is, I'm not going to say it is, that's amazing. I love that, They would have wiped us out by now if they wanted to. But
I think with the other dimensions, it's hard to fathom just because, again, we can't necessarily see anything besides the 3D dimension that we're living in. So thinking of anything that'd be in a different dimension that we wouldn't be able to see, but it's already here, just doesn't seem comprehensible, at least to me. My brain doesn't process it. But it is just strange to think that we don't really know the possibilities.
Oh yeah, but who's the fourth dimension is time. So if anything's beyond that, then they have the ability to go back and forth. So even if another type of beings are from a galaxy far away, who's to say what we're doing on Earth isn't a butterfly effect that will affect those galaxies out there in the future? And they're like, hey man, you got to cut this out because you're going to mess us up all the way out here in a different time period. You know what I mean? You just can't think that simply about it, because it's just all we could comprehend is what we see around us. We have to draw comparisons. Like I was in a sculpture class where this guy Jordy Shell, he's amazing, and he sent us all these emails of these sea creatures that washed up during a typhoon in Japan or whatever. And he said, this is the best material you could have for reference for doing like aliens and science fiction stuff. And even when I was sculpting a demon, he was like, you got to make it resemble something in nature. Otherwise, you're going to remove the believability of it if you make it too wonky. You know what I mean? And he went through some of he's like, well, point out that he had like a whole display of stuff he made. And he said, what are the most believable looking beings that I've created? And I pointed them out. And he said, oh, those eyes are elk eyes. And these are, horns from this creature, and these features and the teeth, I referenced this, and it was all taken from even like the stereotypical image of the devil himself. It's got freaking like a tail and hooves and horns and teeth like an animal and all that stuff. And of course, that in the color red is just to excite you. It's like why McDonald's uses it. It's just drawing things that would affect your unconscious and make you upset about it. You know what I mean? Like viewing it as a threat. Okay, we're gonna make this character Satan, and it's gonna be visually a threat. What do we need to do? And that's why they took all that stuff, and moshed it together. I think,
Yeah, I think there's a lot of stuff that interconnect between each other as well. Like we have all these different, not to go completely 180 on a different topic, but I think a lot of the religions are based off of modern man's like interactions with not necessarily aliens, but like something they couldn't understand. Like they think these angels and these other higher power gods came from the skies and everything else. Who's to say like this whole ancient astronaut theory thing isn't somewhat plausible? Because if you go back through most religions, they all have the same kind of concept to where even like the Native Americans, the Hopi Indians, they have the star people. So it's like, who's to say that what our ancient ancestors thousands of years ago were seeing and making these stories about, making religions out of, weren't just something from a different
Did you ever read this
coming through here?
Oh yeah. Did you ever read the story about the Sandown clown?
No, I have not.
It was in a journal in the 70s about UFOs, but people were arguing like, hey, does this have anything to do with aliens? But it's a possible interdimensional being. And granted, the kids that encountered this being, they were only like 8 years old, so it could all be a bunch of crap. But the description, if you see the drawing of the Sandown clown, where he called himself All Colors Sam, you can just search that and find it. And this thing looks a lot like a kachina. So when you said that, that's the first thing I thought about. And even when I showed it to a friend of mine that's Native American, he's like, wow, that's so cool that creature resembles a kachina. Like it could be, you know. I'm like, I don't know. I mean, it was docile. It didn't harm the kids. The kids hung out with it for a while. It didn't say what it was, you know. Like the second question. Huh?
I actually think I have heard this story. Didn't it have something down by a river and they claimed they went into like its ship, but it was like supposedly like its home and it looked like a clown to them, but it.
Yeah.
Yeah, I actually have heard this story. I didn't know what it was called, but I kind of know what you're talking about.
It was supposedly written by the father, and then it was anonymously entered into that magazine or zine or whatever. I don't know what you call that. Little monthly, weekly thing about UFOs. But yeah, I just thought that was cool, you know. And the resemblance of a kachina was very striking.
They thought that maybe it picked up a clown's, like, because of the way it actually looked. It says that the kids couldn't process it, so it had to project an image that they could relate to.
Exactly. And that kind of goes back into the interdimensional stuff, is that if you're not seeing it, you don't have the ability to see it in its entirety. Who's to say our brain isn't kind of filling in the blank, or they are assisting with like relatability, and some would say that about the Sasquatch, and you said that earlier. You know, I have a friend that that believes there is a direct connection between the Sasquatch and UFOs, and he's got stories. You know, I don't know if he'd want to do this. I'll ask him. You know.
Yeah, I'd definitely like to hear from him.
Oh, yeah. All right, I'll pass the information down.
Yeah, this is the type of stuff that the whole reason I started this podcast is basically because I want to hear the actual stories from people themselves that have encountered the stuff and seen the stuff and have their own conclusions they've decided for what they've seen. Because a lot of podcasts, you just hear people talking, like just the host talking about and reading someone else's experiences, and that's not what I'm about. I'd rather hear it from the horse's mouth rather than relaying stories. So I'm always wanting to find out more information from people.
Oh, sure. And, you know, I hate to go this direction because this is gonna, but I do think there's a connection with like ghost experiences too and stuff like that, because I've had a handful of those as a kid, and that's kind of why I kept so tight-lipped about the orb, as there was some other things that happened and still do. And thank God, recently, 2 years ago, I moved into this town and I was sitting on the stoop smoking a cigarette, and so many people came by, and not all at once, but they were like, oh, you know, Woodbury's haunted, right? And they had a ghost tour and a paranormal demonstration, and I rolled my eyes about it. You know, most of my life I doubted my sanity about all this stuff, but then, you know, my girlfriend that was upstairs was, I was sitting on the couch and she was like, get over here now. And I thought she was going to yell at me about not getting fabric softener or something like that. And I'm just like, yeah, I'll be there in a second. And she's like, no, get over here right now. She cursed a lot, and I'm not going to quote all that. But yeah, I heard this sound that sounded like a drill or a squealing pipe. I couldn't figure it out. And I poked my head in the bathroom when she was pointing, and the toilet paper was unraveling faster than you put it on the highest setting of a drill, you know? And it's a really crude toilet paper holder that it has a cell phone holder on top, but it's just a bent bar. Like, you know, it's just less than an inch wide, and then I don't even know, like, just it's just like a sliver of metal. Anyways, that sound was the resistance of the cardboard scraping against that metal bar. And so when it was done unwinding, that's the first thing I did was pull off the cardboard, the tube off of it, and just examine it. There was nothing in there, you know. And there was other things that were happening too, and stuff that happened before that, but I just thought I was going nuts, you know. And I do have a considerable amount of cameras in this building. But what really sucks about that footage is that someone could always pick it apart and say, oh, well, you know, you were hiding under there manipulating this, or someone did this and that off the camera. And it just so happens. I don't have any footage yet that could be undeniable, you know. And one thing that happened, I don't know if it has anything to do with paranormal, but I had a display case explode while me and my customer were outside. And when we came back in, you know, this whole thing was shattered. And when I checked the footage, the thing that my cameras do is they only record when there's movement. And for about 2 minutes beforehand, and we were outside for over 10 minutes, 2 minutes before that, it was recording for absolutely no reason. And then when the display case shattered, it looked like someone just took a baseball bat to it. But there's a glitch in the footage where it just goes from not being broken to broken. I did put it on Facebook, and everybody's like, well, clearly someone just paused the camera and, you know, it damaged it and then ran away and put the cameras back on. But that's not what happened. And that's the most suspicious part of it, is how the camera system reacted to this whole thing. You know, why did it record for 2 minutes? What the heck was happening? And I looked at that footage so many times. There's nothing going on. And I don't have errors like that happening with the system where it just records for no reason, you know?
Honestly, if you had full on video of everything happening, someone would still try and discredit it, just because that's how we are programmed to be these days. Everyone.
Oh, absolutely. Everybody wants to wrap life in a tight little box. You know, see, I don't want to do that. You know, I like the mystery of life. I don't want to know everything. I mean, if after, you know, I serve my term here on Earth, maybe afterwards, maybe I'd want that information. But not at the moment, no, it kind of keeps me going, you know. I love reading about this stuff. And the experiences kind of pull me away from the things I'm really afraid of, like other people, and build some, you know, the IRS and stuff like that. You know?
The real life stuff that we all have to deal with.
Yeah, that's what I'm really afraid of. My God. And even when the whole toilet paper situation happened, you know, my girlfriend was like, whoa, you know, how come you're not concerned about it? I'm like, well, it's not kitchen knives getting thrown at me. I mean, although at the time, you know, toilet paper was a high commodity and very expensive. And then even the day after that too, like, she exited through the lower floor. She didn't go to the restroom. I double checked the footage, and I walked in the bathroom before I started working, and all the toilet paper was unraveled on the ground. This happened for a couple of weeks, where I just walk in the bathroom and the toilet paper was just unraveled on the floor. And eventually it went from that to just the whole roll being pulled off and just the whole thing just thrown across the room, you know. I don't know what that was, you know, or why nothing's really happening now. Maybe because the last thing that happened here, we just laughed at it. And maybe that has to do with the energy we're giving it. Maybe it's trying to invoke a reaction. We're not giving it the reaction it wants, you know. And I hear that, you know, 2 years ago, we were setting up this building, you know, that ghosts or whatever don't like when you modify a building they're familiar with. It just messes with their memory of that place or whatever. But that's just all what, you know, if you decide to believe it, you know.
Kind of going back to the whole parallel dimensions, different, everything else, I've always wondered if, like, the spirit realm isn't just something of a higher dimension that we can't see, but somehow still interacts with us.
Oh, sure. Absolutely. I mean, that's exactly where I'm going with it, for sure, you know.
Because I know there's like different spectrums, like these cameras that can see in like all different light spectrums, because we can only see in certain ones. And like, obviously you have infrared and you have all these other ones, and they can pick up stuff that you can see that we can't see with the naked eye. Who's to say that these spirits or whatever they actually are aren't something from a different dimension that we're just not capable of seeing or understanding?
Oh, absolutely. That's exactly what I concur with, because there's a lot of things that correspond with the UFO and paranormal stuff, such as those light balls. Like, I remember as a child, my mom was said after her aunt passed away, a ball of light went into her room, and it was bigger than what I saw. And I just remember, even as it was happening, I was like, oh my God, is this a light ball, like a spirit, like my mom was talking about? But I immediately felt that it wasn't. I was like, this has nothing to do with my family members. This has nothing to do with, ghosts or anything. I even had a medium, not that I sought out a medium, but a medium was talking to me, and I didn't divulge much information. But I asked them, I said, what do you think that light ball was when I saw the child? And they were like, oh, it's an angel. And I'm just like, nah, I don't think it is. I'm leaning more towards like a robot or like a space insect or something that's flying around like a gnat or something. I don't know, it definitely acknowledged me, but it didn't give me any information, no telepathic message. I didn't hear the voice of my the deceased family member or anything like that. You know what I mean? It was silent. That's one thing I forgot to say. Didn't make a noise whatsoever. Dead silent. It was a very quiet night.
I know some people have seen stuff that they call ball lightning, which I have no idea what that is or how that works. I've never really looked into it, but
and I thought that for years. And there's depictions in artwork that go back, a couple hundred years, and scientifically it's hypothetical, but there is no current footage or pictures of ball lightning. That's the same thing as UFOs. Even if you do believe in it, ball lightning, there's no proof of it right now. Not yet, And the way it behaved, it was very clear to me it wasn't. But for more than a decade, I wrote it off as ball lightning for sure. But that's just not what it was,
It seemed to have some sort of intelligence to itself.
Mm-hmm. Oh, yeah. It only came down because I was staring at it. And it was just like, oh, okay, you see me? And then it just waved itself around. And I don't know what that back and forth motion was. I don't know if that was like a wave hello or if it was scanning me, photographing me. That would be intense, If some being in the future was like, here's a picture of you when you were a kid that we took, or a video. Because we saw that you saw us. So we were like, whatever,
I think if there are something coming here to look at the earth, they do the same thing that we kind of do. Like when we go off and investigate new areas, like we're out looking for new species, like these scientists are out digging around in jungles or whatever. If they were sending out probes, wouldn't they have like some sort of electronic things to go around and scan things and like trying to get an idea before they sent their actual people here? I think if for
absolutely.
Space travel, everything that's probably actually traveling through space is probably not an actual, you're not going to encounter the actual being. You're going to encounter like something that they've created to go out and explore. Like when we send probes through space, that's what they're sending here.
Oh, no doubt. Absolutely. I mean, it's funny to me that one story, I forgot the name of these gentlemen. One passed away and one's old and about to pass away. He's got ill. But it was like in the early 70s and they were fishing. And this was in Missouri, I think, if I remember. I haven't heard this story in a long time. There was an older gentleman and a younger gentleman, and they were fishing in an area where they weren't permitted to. And the younger guy's like, well, let's just fish somewhere else. And the old guy's like, nah, nothing's going to happen. They saw a blue light behind them. There was like 2 or 3 robotic aliens from a craft, took them on board where they had like a female looking gray examine them. And they got released back. There wasn't much time loss, I don't think, if any. But immediately the older guy, started publicly talking about it. And when they were brought into, the older guy's like, I'm going to contact the sheriff and we're going to report this. And the young guy's like, no, man, everybody's going to think I'm crazy. I don't want to do this. And they were saying the young guy was clawing at the walls in the police office. And they called up the guy that did the lie detector test and said, I know you're off duty and at home doing your thing, and I know it's late, but we have 2 gentlemen here that claim that they were abducted. Do you want to do something about that? And the guy was like, oh, heck yeah. And they tested him like 3 or 5 times and they came up, they weren't lying about a thing. And the sheriff asked the guy doing the lie detector test, what do you think? He's like, well, we ran this test more than 3 times and I believe they believe what they're saying is true. I'm inclined to say that they're not lying based on the evidence, And the town ended up believing them. The kid became quiet about it. He didn't want to talk about it any further than that. But the older guy published a book. But so where I'm getting at is the parallel of fishing and abduction. I thought that was hilarious. It was like catch and release, And the telepathic message they got was that we're not here to hurt you and we'll be done soon. And that's hilarious to me because they were probably doing the same thing to fish. Or just catching fish, pulling the hook out, throwing it back in. You know what I mean? We tag animals and chip them and all this stuff, and they send them back out in the wild. It's so funny how similar that was.
I've actually got a guy that I'm talking to try and get on for an episode. He's from a different country, so the time zones are messed up, but he's supposed to be a doctor. And
wow.
He removes implants from people.
Okay.
And he wants to come on and talk about it. He named some of the stuff that he's been checking and looking. I have no idea what he's talking about because clearly I don't know any of that crap. So, but like all the stuff that he's testing for it. And that's definitely something I'm interested in because, again, I think that's something like what we do. You just said it. We tag animals. We do this and that. So what would not, I can't think that why wouldn't a different species just come down and investigate us, do the same thing? Like they're going to tag us. They're going to monitor us. They're going to do whatever they can because they're interested in us.
Oh, yeah. Yeah. And it's funny you said he's a doctor and all that. I mean, I don't know what his credentials are, but I've definitely worked with people where I'm stuck in the chair with them for hours. And like one guy that stands out, and I won't say his name, of course, the dude's got 3 kids. He's married. He's been married a long time. There's no hiccups in that relationship. And he's a very health conscious individual that did like those races, the triathlons and whatever, blah, blah, blah. And he's an environmental engineer. And one time, I'm dead serious. He told me that his whole life he gets screamed at by demons out of the blue. He'll just be like putting his tie on at home or whatever, and these demons are like, "Kill yourself," and they throw him across the room and all this crazy shit. And I'm like, for me, and then it took him a while to tell me that, and he didn't seem embarrassed about it. But here's a guy that's very much sane. He's got a phenomenal an education. He's just, if you're going to believe someone, it's going to be believing a person like that, and for him to say that to me, what the hell is that all about? Yeah. Oh, and so this is where, it gets kookier, and I don't know if there's any correlation, but the tattoo machine I was tattooing with on that occasion in which he was saying that demons like try to sabotage his life and scream at him and throw him around and all that. My machine broke in 3 different places in my hand. My machine fell apart like someone loosened everything up and just parts start falling. And he was like, "See, I told you," I mean, the likelihood of that was very slim to none. These are very like well built, and usually there's like Loctite on the hardware and all this stuff like that. But yeah, 3 different segments of the machine, and if this was on a video, it'd show you what kind it was and where it broke. But it was pretty much impossible to happen all at once, and he immediately associated with how he's cursed with that. Like, oh, this is proof of what I'm talking about. I just laughed. I was like, okay, it's weird.
That's actually very interesting because I just had a recording session with someone for a future episode that he said he has demonic attacks, and they basically follow him. They have since he was a child, and his wife was also on the call. She was verifying stuff because when they got together, he moved into her house and she never had any sort of experiences. But as soon as he moved in, everything that he'd experienced started happening in their house. Like stuff was getting broken, stuff was like falling off. Like she said, one of her hairbrushes fell off as a hard hairbrush, hard plastic, and it just shattered everywhere from the force of how it just impacted into the ground.
So
it's interesting that he said had these demons screaming at him all the time. This guy said he literally was getting attacked all the time by what he called demons, because he said they were like sharp pains that would come through his back, through the front, always, like all the time, just because of it's just what he's dealt with. So, and he had people that collaborates the story with him because they've experienced it too. So it's just interesting that you just told me something similar. So
Oh yeah, I mean, he's not the only one though. I interact with so many people of all sorts of educational backgrounds, and I mean, for the past 13 years or so, it's usually upper middle class people at this point. Very rarely do I tattoo lower income folks. But where I'm saying is not that I wouldn't. I don't care about that. But what I'm saying is some of these people that tell me these insane stories, and it's amazing because sometimes the witnesses will be there with them, or they'll call the person, or they will, they'll generate some sort of witness pretty immediately. It could be their wife, it could be their friends. They'll call somebody up that will testify to it. And to not get off track. The connection of all UFO and ghost stuff that I'm thinking, and what's interesting with that alien abduction group that I found you on was people are saying that reptilians thrive on negative energy, and sometimes they say that about Greys too, and I can't help but to think that's what it is. Even in my personal experience, when we laughed off the last paranormal thing that happened in this building, it just ceased. We have not had anything happen in here for it's been, I don't know, a year or so, and I can't help but to think there's a connection to that. And yeah, I guess the more energy you give it, the more it displays itself. And maybe that's the same thing. Maybe they're trying to invoke a reaction to these people, and there's some sort of negative energy that they like. I don't know, but I mean, even going back to the ghost stuff. I'm sorry if it's too sidetracked, but one story that really, really, I love it is just I was tattooing these kids. One of them was sitting next to the one I was tattooing, and they were like jocks. They were like, football dudes, but they're good people. They're not like bullies or whatever. And they're intelligent, and they have a good head on their shoulders, but they're very physically fit football star kids, And the one that I was tattooing was telling me a story that they were all in a football field, at night drinking heavily. And from their point of view, you could see the parking lot pretty good. And one of their friends had like a really fancy car that he was very proud of. And so one of them notes or says to the others, he's like, look, that guy's disrespecting the car in the parking lot. They saw a dude that had his foot rested against the hood of the car. Like he was standing away from the car and had his foot propped against the hood, or bumper or whatever. And they were all like, yo, let's go fuck him up. And the guy that had his foot on the car, sorry if that messed anything up. The guy that had the foot on the car had a group of friends around him. And this is the weirdest thing. All the kids described it as they looked like greasers, where they had pompadours, white shirts, leather jackets, blue jeans, And so they all start running after these guys like, oh, we're going to beat him up. Oh, we're going to get him, this and that. And what they told me was the closer they got to these people, and they didn't move, the more they vanished. And by the time they got to that place, they were completely gone. They didn't run away. They just disappeared.
That's interesting.
And they got one of the kids. So yeah, I was tattooing the kid that told me the story, and his friend was just agreeing with it because he was there, the one that sit next to him. And then they were like, oh, you don't believe me? Watch this. And they called one of their friends, and they're like, remember that time we were at the football field and we saw those greasers? And the kid was immediately like, yo, yeah, that was nuts. It was just, there was a lot of witnesses to this story locally here. Oh, it just goes on from there. Even like just talking to couples all tattoo, like the wife or the husband, and they'll talk about paranormal stuff that reoccurs involving their children sometimes, unfortunately. Not that I've heard of a child getting hurt, but they'll tell me a wild story, and then their wife will come in with like a coffee and some food and be like, oh, honey, remember that black cloud that went from our child's room to the attic, and this happened and that happened, and what do I have to do with that? You know what I mean? And these people usually have really good jobs working at hospitals or construction companies. And they're like it's so indiscriminate that, even people that are religious tell me these stories, people that are, well-paid jobs. And some of them have given me some good life advice where obviously they have a good grip on reality. I just don't know, but I can't help but think it's all connected, as we were even saying.
Since I started doing this, it's only been just going on 2 months now, but I've been trying to advertise here and there, and I actually do work in the construction field. Like,
oh, nice.
Like, I'm not actually out doing the work, but I'm actually like the engineer of the jobs or whatever. But
yeah,
So when I go out there and I'm seeing stuff, people are like, because I got my little sticker on the back of my truck or whatever advertising. So when I drive around, people see the podcast like it's free advertisement. And I've been asked questions about it. And some people have actually brought up like some of their stuff to me. So I think it's once they figure out what I'm doing, they're more open to share their experiences. And it's strange to me how many people actually have these experiences, but typically won't talk about it.
Oh yeah, for sure. Another one that stands out, and there was multiple kids that saw the same thing as they were walking around at night, in the middle of the night, like beyond midnight, I guess. And at some point, one of the kids pointed out there was a half a person crossing the street. It was just a set of legs that was walking from one side of the street to the other, And the kid's like, "Oh man, I still have that footage." I'm like, "You have footage of that? You have to show it to me." And he said, "Well, it was a couple of laptops back, and I'd have to find the computer and yank it off the hard drive." And he's like, I'll get it back. He's like, "I kind of just forgot about it." And his friend was like, "Oh, well, I was there for it." And one thing that parallel I drew recently was I was watching a lot of paranormal videos, obviously UFO stuff, and now I want to run into this kid again and show him the Fresno. What are they called? Walkers. They look like a set of legs walking on the front lawn of that house. The Fresno night crawlers. There you go.
Yep.
And I want to show him that and be like, did it look more like this? Like, because I failed to ask what I should have asked. It was like, what kind of shoes was it wearing? You know what I mean? But the way they presented it is it looked like a normal person's like lower half of the body, like the top part evaporated away, and it was just like, the hip to the feet, and just casually walking across the street. And it just blew their minds. I love this multiple witness stuff. Oh my God. And I'm considering actually like exploiting this stuff more and asking these people, would you want to sign this paperwork? And I don't know what I would do with that. You know what I mean? What I'd fork it over to, but like catalog it, because there's some amazing stories out there. It's incredible.
If you ever get anyone coming in that wants to share their stuff, have them reach out to my podcast. I'd love to hear
that'd be awesome.
Stories from them.
My next thing I'm very excited about is I've been tattooing this one kid for years, he's in the police academy. I don't know if he's an officer now, and he's a very right-wing guy. Like, he was into that 3%er movement, and he voted for Trump and all this stuff like that. And I was tattooing one of his friends who's also an officer and has been in the force longer. And he was saying, "Oh, I have a friend that's a medium." I'm like, "Oh yeah." It's like, "What, do they do that for a living?" And like, "No, they're really embarrassed of it. They consider it to be a curse." And he went on to tell me that his father was too. And I was like, "Well, what's his father do for a living?" And he's like an English teacher or something like that. Like, not even, he doesn't acknowledge it, doesn't talk about it, doesn't want to, very embarrassed about it. But they claim it's genetically passed down, this ability of being mediums, and they can communicate with the dead and shit like that. So, sorry. And so I was like, "Oh my God." Oh, okay. But I was like, "Oh my God, can you get him to talk to me about that stuff?" And he's like, "Oh, I'll see." And then he messaged him and said, "Tim wants to ask you about your, psychic abilities or whatever he's got. I don't know what medium besides communicating with the dead. I don't know yet. I haven't talked to him about it yet." And I've been like hovering over his message thing, like, "Oh, I want to start talking about it now, but I'll just wait for him to come back in, and then we'll be in a room alone, so he could, it's not like he's gonna look like a kook in front of a bunch of people, And I'm just excited because it sounds so legit. And I've had customers say that they were at a party or a social event, and someone sat down next to them and be like, "I'm a medium, not by trade, but I have someone that's just won't leave me alone, and they want me to tell you something, and I just want to ask you, are you giving me permission to pass this message to you?" And they'll be like, "Sure." And it'll be like, your mom is wondering why the red dress is still in the closet. And it'll be like, "Oh my God, how the hell would you don't know me at all?" Like, without any question asking, because I know there's a lot of con artists historically in the carnivals and whatever, of cold reading people and all that. And there's just some stories I hear where it doesn't involve the cold reading at all, or the person just starts by, dispensing this mind-blowing information that no one else would know, And, of course, going back to aliens and how they have like that ability of telepathy, and then, or they don't even have to use their mouth or facial expressions anymore, because the thought they transfer over to you is much more than a facial expression or a way to say it. You just know what they meant by it. And the stories that that these telepathic aliens are just future people, and it's just a part of that evolution. I can't help but to think that there's some sort of connection there, especially when you look at DNA. And I did, what did I do? Ancestry? Yeah, I did Ancestry. My father did 23andMe, or it's called. But not that there was any anomalies in mine, but I've spoken to people that have that unknown DNA from West Africa. They cannot, like, not that they've overanalyzed it, but I do. When I hear someone say they have unknown DNA, I'm like, what the hell is that all about? You know what I mean? And then you go even crazier and make an even bigger tinfoil hat to think that, like, there was some influence, somewhere along the line. And it's weird that there's those disembodied, like, genetic lack of connection to the evolution. Like I know, what was it? Is it octopus, or it's the octopuses, right? They're the ones that don't really have a connection to anything else. They're kind of like the aliens of the earth, they say, right?
Yep.
So all that.
I actually have a lot of tattoos that are all cephalopods. So
that's awesome.
Always, my wife and I have a connection. We've always been giant fans of octopus and stuff like that. So
I don't blame you. That's awesome.
I've always thought they're like the most interesting creatures, because everyone has said that, like, there's just no, for what they are, they're just an alien, basically. There's nothing else.
Yeah.
Now this is actually, since you just brought this up, and I don't ever try and make this podcast about my experiences or anything, so I typically don't share, but I can't get this off my mind now since you brought it up. You mentioned the crawler.
Yeah.
Now, this is actually something that I'd never heard of up until Saturday. And I was at a paranormal convention, and I was on a different podcast. So I sat down with a different podcast. I was there, and I was doing an interview there, and I was talking about something that I encountered about 15 years ago. And the only thing I can describe it as, without going into full detail, is there was a walking set of legs stumbling down the road, and it was taller than the vehicle I was driving. It looked like someone was walking drunk, and they were wrapped in like a big black blanket. And they were just kind of like stumbling down the road, and I had to swerve to miss them. And the guy that was in front of me, he originally swerved to miss it. So two people saw the thing, because when I pulled up to him, he was freaking out, asking what it was. It didn't have a head, anything like that. So when I was telling them this story, they brought up the crawlers. And I was like, yeah, I never actually looked into that before. I never heard of it. And then a different podcast that I follow just released an episode on Monday about crawlers. I was like, well, that's weird. I've never heard of them before. I was like, just heard about them Saturday. Then 2 days later, I hear now an episode on a podcast I follow. They're discussing crawlers. And then you just brought up someone having the same incident. I was like, okay, well, in the last 4 days, I've never heard of this thing before. And now I've heard about it by multiple people, different podcasts. And it's interesting to me.
Oh, yeah. And that brings me back to, sorry. Do you need to continue?
No, that's fine.
That brings me back to the interdimensional thing that everybody keeps on bringing up. And it's like, because if we were to display ourselves to two-dimensional beings, they would only see a sliver of us. You know what I mean? Like, it would just be, I don't know if I'm saying this right, but like a set of eyes or something like that, or just like segments of your fingers or whatever that you would pass through to the second dimension. They would not be able to see all of us as a three-dimensional being. They don't perceive, nor do they exist in that. And when I hear about these half beings, that's the first thing I think about, and maybe that's what you saw. I don't know,
Yeah, it's just interesting to me. Like I said, I can't get out. I was like, I haven't ever heard of this before. And then, like, within the last 4 or 5 days, I keep hearing about it now. It's almost like something's pulling me to look into it now.
Oh, yeah. Why not? It's very cool.
But yeah, if you do actually have anyone else that has like stories or whatever, and if you think about it, just try and have them reach out to me if they'd be willing to share, because I'm always looking for guests. I'm always trying to find out more information on what people experience and everything. So, like, again, I think all this stuff's connected some way or form. Like it's got to be.
Oh, yeah. I mean, even if it's I'm sure it's very omnidirectional, even if it does, like where it's not like a real linear path of understanding it. I'm sure it just kind of scatters. I mean, because you're talking, if it's true, there's over 100 dimensions. I mean, geez, we can't even grasp most of that, nor can we depict it on paper like a tesseract. Like, yeah, you can draw one, but that's not really what it looks like. It's just the closest thing that we could make on paper. You know what I mean? But it doesn't exist in our dimension. So, oh well, that's a tesseract for now until we actually have the ability to see it for what it really is.
Mm-hmm. Well, I appreciate you coming out and talking with me this morning. Like, I know it's a little bit early, but
no, that was cool.
And if you'd like to plug your tattoo shop, or people can get out with you if they're from your area, try and hook up with you, get some work done.
Oh yeah, I'm in. The location I'm at right now is in Woodbury, New Jersey. It's Tattoo Timmy's, and then this shop is about a year and a half old, and then the other shop I own in Turnersville is called Tattoo Timmy's as well, and that's 15 minutes away from here, and it's next to the expressway entrance to get to Atlantic City, and both of them are really close to Philly. But that shop's over 10 years old now, and I got a bunch of employees and all that. Thank you. I appreciate it.
Yep,
website, tattootimmys.com. There you go.
I'll put that in the information on the episode.
Okay, way cool. I appreciate it. I wasn't looking to do that. I was just, it's very nice of you, though.
No, I always try and help out. Like, I've got full sleeves and tattoos and everything else. So it's like, I always appreciate artists. So I always try and help them out.
One thing that's really interesting about my job is because people are in a very traumatic, painful situation, is that they immediately divulge stuff to me without knowing me very well, that sometimes I don't want to hear it. And sometimes I'm like, wow, that's pretty intense. But yeah, like that endorphin rush really does unlock, a different type of honesty, and even just to influence them too. Like, that I tell them something while they're getting a tattoo, they're more than likely to follow through. If I say, like, watch this documentary or go to this website, they're in a state of mind where it's in there in their head. You know what I mean? It's not like talking to someone on the street where half of it's going in one ear and out the other. And it's just crazy that like 80% easily people, you'll have that 20% that don't have a paranormal story, but a good 80%, and it doesn't matter where they're from, what their job is, their educational, it's indiscriminate completely. People with high standing in our society, model citizens, etc. People in law enforcement and politics, they all have these stories, and they're different. I've never had many that connected together, and like I said, and they are usually accompanied by many witnesses. Whether it just be their child and their husband, or it could just be a whole squad of friends, and that just blows my mind. And it actually makes me appreciate this job so much more now. And it actually keeps me going because, you can only, and no matter what you do, when you surpass that 10, 20-year mark in a career, you start to kind of feel a little wane in your interest in it. But God dang, does this keep the spark going? You know what I mean?
Yeah, because you never know who's going to come through that door and what stories they got to tell you.
Oh, yeah. So I hope that I help somebody that might have a similar story or help understand something a little bit better. I feel like it was just, for most of my life, just it wasn't worth telling, because A, people are going to think I'm nuts, but B, it's a whole lot of lack of information. And I hope that people react the same way that I did, was like, okay, so I don't have much of a story to tell, but now we have more people that are open-minded and have their ears open to this stuff, and we should all start connecting the dots together.
Yeah, that's the whole point of this podcast for me, is kind of almost to what you do when you hear their stories and everything else. I'm giving a platform for others that are afraid to tell their story out in public or whatever, so they can come here and talk with me about it, and then they're able to get a little bit of relief knowing that there's someone out there listening that are not just keeping it to themselves, and they're not going to get ridiculed or anything about it just because I keep things confidential. So if they don't want their information shared, which I won't share it anyways, but like I'll list them as a name or whatever they want me to call them. But other than that, that's all anyone's ever going to know about it. So if they feel like they're able to get some sort of something off their chest like that's what I'm here for. I'm trying to just give them a place so they can talk about what they're afraid to talk about normally.
Oh yeah, for sure. I mean, I could have gone on a lot more about a bunch of different things, and I know we were kind of randomly scattering around, but yeah, if I ever speak on your podcast again, I'll make sure to like jot down information and deliver more information, and you know what I mean, like all that. Or if I have customers that want to do it, but I'll be more proactive with getting my facts right too. I know some stuff's like, I think I remember this and I think I remember that, but I'd rather be more like direct information. I was listening to a podcast yesterday where the lady was saying it takes her like more than a month to do her program, and people complain, how come you don't do it more frequently? She's like, well, I have a full-time job, but I do this incredible amount of research. I forgot her name. I think it was Kelly something. It was pretty cool. But, this incredible amount of research and obviously, and her delivery of it's great. She's not sounding like she's stammering around like I do or something like that. You know what I mean? It's very clear, and you could understand the where she's going with it without any awkwardness. Unlike me. Anyways,
that's fine. But yeah, I do appreciate it, and I'll definitely have you back on again if you got anything else you'd like to talk about. You think of anything, just get a hold of me, and we'll get another time scheduled. Like I said, I release a new episode every week, so I'm always looking for content and always looking for stories. So
definitely. Alrighty. Well, very cool. Nice to meet you, and thanks for having me on here. I appreciate it. No problem.
Thank you.
Have a great one. Bye.
Bye. And that's our show, everyone. Again, let's thank Tim for coming out this morning and talking with me a little bit. Definitely had some good discussions and stuff to think about. If you've ever had an encounter or an experience or story to share and you'd like to be on a future episode, you can get a hold of me by sending me an email at tinfoiltalespodcast@gmail.com. You can find me on Facebook. Just look for Tinfoil Tales Podcast, and we'll figure something out for a future episode. Good night, everyone.